This time on Poll Hub, it's Poll Hub Live. Or at least it was live on the night of October 20th when we recorded this in Zoom with an audience. We're talking about a lot of things tonight. The changing parties, what the polls say about that. We've heard a lot about this partisan realignment, but there's some really interesting data about what makes a Republican nowadays and what makes a Democrat. Very different than in the past. Then polling and journalism, troubling trends in both, but where those two trends meet is really troubling, and we're going to talk about that. Polling in a hyperpartisan era. Now, this affects the polling industry, obviously, because we're calling into households where there's a lot of partisanship. What do we have to do to address that? But also, how people think about polling in the polling industry in general. It's gotten more partisan. We'll explain that. And then Lee's fun fact. Holiday themed. Granted, Halloween is a little early, but we're bringing it early because it's sweet. So get ready, because it's going to be a lot of fun. And just before we get started, I want to let you know about two technical glitches that we had. The very beginning of the recording was unusable, so we're going to kind of join the show slightly in progress, about a minute in progress. And then the very end of the show just cut off. It was a technical glitch, and so you're going to hear our producer, Ashley Marsnick, trying to complete a thought, but it's just cut off in mid-sentence. I think she was going to say almonds, but it might have been peanuts. We don't really know, so stick around.
Pew Research did a very interesting survey, although it didn't necessarily punch through on some of the more entertaining media sources. It was a very interesting poll. They polled 10,000 people using their America panel, which they've been putting together now for several years, so that they could drill down into lots and lots of detail and information. And what they found was that Donald Trump remains an incredibly important political figure to Republicans in this country. In fact, 44% want him to run again for office, and 22% want him to support other candidates who share his view. So 2/3 of Republicans say they want Trump to remain the leader of the Republican Party, and they want him to continue guiding the party through the midterm elections. So, guys, what's the Trump magic?
Well, let me just say first off that the takeaway from me on this is it's Trump's political party. And this is like unprecedented as far as I can tell. Jay's a little older than me, of course, and maybe he'll talk about whether it's, I got that backwards, sorry. But it's unusual for a former president, and that is what he is, even though he only used the word in one of his legal documents this week, the first time they've referred to himself as former, but a president who didn't concede, was involved in some capacity with January 6th at the Capitol. This is really unprecedented. They usually, Obama said, I'll let a few things, if it gets really dicey about the democracy, I'll say a few couple words. He gave a couple speeches towards the way late in the Trump administration tenure. But I just find it just so interesting that he's just the force that he is. And, I know, Jay, you probably want to talk at some point about the use of social media in the time we have tonight, but he's certainly become a major force in using all kinds of ways of keeping his base intact.
Well, he's actually been, he's been kicked off some of the social media. But yes. Jay, is it the Republican Party or is it the Trump Party?
I mean, I think it's the Trump Party. I think we've seen that not only in our polling, but there's been polling by other organizations that have asked a very direct question: Are you do you think of yourself more as a Republican or more of a Trump person? And a majority of Republicans have said, kind of no matter how that question is asked, that they are more of a Trump person. And in the broadest kind of generalizations, the parties have changed. There had been changes over the decades, but there's really been this kind of dramatic change in the last 4 years, especially or last 5 years now, from the time that Trump kind of became the leader of the Republican Party. And one non-Trump Republican wag noted that the Republican Party has traded voters who don't vote very often, which is less well-educated whites in rural areas. They traded those, or they traded to get those by trading suburban, largely white suburban voters who are among the most reliable voters. And that is kind of what the realignment that we've seen in the last 3 elections, including 2018. We've seen that is this realignment of a key part of the Republican Party to incorporate lower educated or lower educational attainment white voters in rural areas, which for a long time, especially in the East and in Appalachia, places like that, were Democrats, loyal Democrats. So a big change there. But one of the things that really stood out in this Pew survey was they asked a question about what people in a party think about criticizing the leader of the party. So they asked, should the party and party candidates and party elected officials be accepting, not accepting at all, of GOP elected officials criticizing Trump, and then vice versa for Democrats. And this is where there's this big, huge divide between the parties that we really hadn't thought about. I mean, this is crazy, right?
Yeah, 63% of Republicans think that elected GOP, that is GOP elected officials, should not criticize Trump or the GOP party. And 57% of Democrats think that elected officials, Democratic elected officials, that it's okay, it's acceptable to criticize Biden, President Biden, and other Democrats. So how have the parties come about? I mean, this is this is just as big as kind of a different view of things as anything else on any policy issue or any candidate that we see, except for perhaps Trump, who is the most polarized with about an 87% favorable rating among Republicans and 6% among Democrats. So what does this say about the two parties?
Well, it says potentially a lot. Let me start with, our friend at USA Today, Susan Page, had talked about not too long ago that the two parties could be differentiated by the Democrats with their candidates and leaders tend to fall in love and Republicans fall in line. So you had Democrats, gaga over Bernie Sanders or Barack Obama, whatever.
They're certainly not in love with Joe Biden.
No, which is interesting. Now, that's the shift, I think. But as far as the Republicans are concerned, as we said, it's all about Donald Trump. And they have, there was a never Trumper thing. I remember way back in New Hampshire when we were up there in 2016, and there was, a stealing over Trump, like 35%. Now he's got 90% of Republicans in his corner. But what the change has been, I think it's fair to say that for both parties right now, it's all about Donald Trump. It's not about Joe Biden. I know he's the president, but it's still, for Democrats, the big motivating factor is every time Donald Trump intimates about coming back into politics, that solidifies the Democrats. He's the biggest.
But hang on a second, Lee. But I think it also plays out in governing as well. I mean, granted, Trump was president, for 4 years, but we did see the Republicans not only stand behind him, but stand behind Mitch McConnell as majority leader, and very cohesively, regardless of whether they had any differences of opinions or on policy, run with the ball. And it's a good way of governing. It's an effective way of governing, where the Democrats, they're sort of hemming and hawing. They have their critics, and apparently rank and file doesn't think too much about it.
No, well, they're down a little bit too.
So I'm curious about how this notion that Democrats are more accepting of criticism of their leaders than Republicans are, which plays out in a lot of different ways. But does it play out in what we're seeing right now with the approval rating of Joe Biden? So his approval rating has kind of flattened. Disapproval approval ratings have flattened over the last month. There was a drop. He went underwater, so he's less. There's more disapprove than approve. But it's according to the 538 average, which looks at a lot of polls and weights them, including ours, based on the quality of the poll. He's flat. He's been about flat for the last month or so.
In the mid 40s.
In the mid 40s, about a 45% approval rating.
Yep.
But how much of this has to do with the fact that Democrats and independent leaning Democrats are willing to say, yeah, I'm not so thrilled with him right now. Whereas with Donald Trump, that range almost never changed because the Republicans who said they liked him never wavered, and everybody else who said they didn't like him never wavered. How much of what we're seeing with Biden's approval rating is a manifestation of the fact that Democrats and independents that lean Democratic are willing to be more critical of the guy they support otherwise?
Exactly. And also recognize that within the Democratic Party, there's a bigger split right now. They come together when Schumer and Pelosi really force the issue, with the exception of two senators, of course, who are very reluctant to. But you have, a split between the more progressive, the more moderate, and that's something the Democrats, as I say, only get unified by Donald Trump. But when they're governing, to Barb's point, they got to figure out how to keep both of those groups together and make compromise. Look, we're going to have some kind of reconciliation bill. There's probably going to be an infrastructure getting through at some point. It may not be what anybody wants in total, but in the end of the day, I think the Democrats aren't going to sacrifice some, important points about the midterm elections and governing in exchange for, a couple $1 trillion here or there.
Look, do Democrats still think they're the majority party?
They act like it sometimes, and Republicans still act like they're the minority party. And when the country is, closer to 50-50 than it was when those attitudes seeped in.
But in that question about the when we were talking about the approval rating and how it is affected by this notion that people are more willing to criticize the leader of one party, we saw in the Pew numbers when they looked in July and they looked in September at the somewhat and strongly approved numbers, that among Democrats that number dropped 9 points from 92 to 83. That's a real drop, not insignificant. But it dropped from 82 to 61 among lean Democrats. And when we think about the way they characterize lean Democrats, which are independents, they push them into a lean Democrat or lean Republican. That's the way that Pew works. You see these big changes in these independent kind of lean voters. And that strikes me as, that's where we identified weeks ago in our own polling that the independents are the ones that are driving this change for Biden's approval rating. Are they the ones who are, yes, they're more willing to criticize Biden, but are they also more willing to walk away or lose interest than hardcore Democrats or hardcore Republicans were for Donald Trump?
I don't know. Because there is that segment of the Republican Party, in other words, people who are independent, who also vote or tend to lean and vote Republican. And I think that's probably kind of shown in the 32% of those Republicans who don't want Trump in politics at all. So those are probably the people that are independent, that can go either way, Democrat or Republican, depending upon whether they like the candidate or not. But there's something about this, just this cohesiveness about Republicans. And I'm just curious if you guys have theories, Lee, either, from your political science.
Let me get some of those books off the shelf.
Yeah, or Jay from, your reporting and speaking, with both office holders and candidates. That seems to just make the difference here.
Yeah, I was going to say that, the motivation's there, the enthusiasm's there. Democrats are a little slower to the take on things like that. And that may just be because of the varied philosophies in there. I will say one thing that's going on in the Republican Party today, we'd be negligent if we didn't mention, there's some different attitudes about what Donald Trump is saying. And when he's relitigating the 2020 election, Arkansas Governor Hutchinson says we got to look ahead. We can't look back to that. Mitch McConnell, of course, doesn't want to relitigate that also because he's interested more in the 2022 elections. Condoleezza Rice surprisingly said that the 2020 election and what happened on the Capitol on January 6th, that's old news. We're looking ahead. And I thought that was surprising. So there is some diverse opinions because Donald Trump is talking about fraud and he's talking about, and a lot of Republicans are starting to think that may not be a good campaign message for them in 2022.
So we have a couple of questions, and we ask the audience to ask questions, and I'll just remind everybody to drop your questions into chat. We're going to move to the next segment in just a second, but Ashley Marcinek, who is our producer, has been producing, our executive producer is on maternity leave. So Ashley, who's a student at Marist, has been stepping in and producing this podcast admirably, along with Athen Hollis for the last, 8 weeks, something like that. Anyway, Ashley, you're around. Pop up on video and ask us the question. Or you don't have to. There you are. Hello. Welcome.
Hello. So we have a question. It's are Sinema and Manchin more Republican like Democrats?
Are Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin more Republican-like Democrats?
Well,
are they more Republicans than Democrats? You might even ask.
They are interesting because Sinema, of course, showed up as a very liberal Democrat. And has since, traded sides, at least in terms of her policy positions. Joe Manchin, of course, comes from a state, West Virginia, where I don't know what the percent was, but Donald Trump carried it by, say something, 40% or something.
A lot of percent.
Gazillion. Gazillion.
They have been not in line on this, but Manchin is, an interesting character. I saw he's talking with Bernie Sanders the last couple of days, and they're intimating if there's some solution down the road. Yes, they're acting kind of like recalcitrant Democrats right now, but I think in the end they're probably going to see him signing on with Chuck Schumer.
Well, remember, we've had Republicans cross the aisle and give the Senate back to the Democrats within our lifetimes. So it's gone both ways. I think they represent the fact that the party is a big party. Yep. Anything else, Ashley, on this one, or should you're the producer? Should we move on to the next segment?
It is time to move on to the next segment, and I will disappear back to the darkness.
Bye. I would say, and to our credit, Ashley, we're being much better this time because when we normally do the podcast, which isn't live, but Ashley is constantly counting us down. She does the grab and cut. She does this, and we ignore her. Today, we've been paying attention until that last
bit. You just broke the streak. Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, so let's move on. And reminder, if you've got questions as we go through this segment, drop them into chat, and Ashley will pop back up at the end of this. We want to turn to something that the three of us all love: polling and journalism. And the fact that there have been tremendous, more than terrific changes in journalism, and there have been tremendous changes in polling. And where the twain meet is troubling to some people, as lower quality polls and lower quality journalism have come together to make it tougher to separate the wheat from the chaff, or the noise from the quality. This was exemplified yesterday by a Philip Bump article in the Washington Post, where he took on Jeremy Peters, a political reporter for the New York Times, for quoting a Marjorie Taylor Greene poll that she did, that was an online, like a poll like we're going to do at the end of this show. Anybody who's in the audience can take the poll, showing that Republicans are very concerned about election security and they're not going to vote because of that. And Jeremy, in his article, kind of mentioned that, and with fairly light caveats about it not being really a poll, to help demonstrate his point that the Republicans are, a C a bit without Trump, or a challenge without Trump at the head of the party right now, at least in elected office. And Philip Bump, columnist for the Washington Post, just blew it up. Said this is like one of the worst uses of polls there can be. It's so interesting. This happened today. We planned this segment last week, but this just happened yesterday, and it does exemplify to some degree what's going on here, right? I mean, Barb, you know the polling industry and what's been going on, and have been watching this. And Lee, you know about the journalism. I mean, we know about all these things, but this seems to be a pretty good example of one of the problems that we're all facing.
Well, yeah, polls are not immune from, a lot of things that we're seeing both in journalism and society. First, I'd like to say the lack of, gatekeepers, but, back in the day, the New York Times and reporters of such would be gatekeepers.
Yeah.
And instead, what we're seeing in a lot of cases is journalists making points,
Yeah.
that support their stories,
Yeah.
and not
And get
really,
clicks.
Yep.
well, and absolutely get clicks, but also just, trying to find numbers that support a point of view, perhaps, or try something anecdotally, which they want to, characterize. And so, it's throughout journalism. I think it's throughout all the the media that we do see. There are lots of different ways this rears its head. I mean, in 2012, we were doing a research study of the right after the presidential election to find out which polling organizations were transparent. And we were doing this along with our Association of Public Opinion Researchers to try to get a sense of, can we move forward with transparency? Meaning, can we all, as pollsters, talk about how we ask the questions, who we're asking them of, when we're doing it, so that the consumer can have a better sense of what the poll means. When we did that research after that campaign, what we found was something. Not only did many polls were not transparent about their methodology, but shockingly, they weren't even polls. In other words, there were organizations that seemed to have been just put together for the campaign itself. Perhaps from PACs, perhaps from the campaigns themselves. We don't know, because there were no longer
They were gone after the
there were
election.
no numbers, there were no
them.
addresses. They had literally disappeared.
Well, they
And
were
what were they trying to do?
They
they
had
were
been in the
transparent.
averages.
They were gone.
Literally, yes.
Different meaning of that.
Well, but the idea here was that, as we've seen, there's a lot of aggregators that take all of the polls, collect them, and average them. And look, I was speaking to a group of public opinion researchers, and everybody says, well, just average all the polls, and then you'll get a good idea of what it is. Well, no, because if you've got a lot of junk in there, you're going to end up with a really, really bad taste. And so in 2012, those polls were thrown in, probably by campaigns and PACs, to affect that average. And so, I think what we've seen is this whole, proliferation of polls, because you can do them anywhere. You can do them on social media. You don't need to have a survey center like we do at the Marist poll.
But they're not, let's be clear, they're not like rigorous polls often when they're done that way. I mean, it's junk
it's
in many
numbers.
cases. Yeah.
It's numbers. And I think, one of the things that I think people have found, and there's been some research to find this too, is that even, some of the online polls, I mean, they're very susceptible to bogus responses. Meaning that people jump in to take them with the intent of simply impacting the results. And so there isn't a lot of oversight. And it undermines the scientific poll. It undermines, obviously, everybody's trust in polling. But again, it's a lot like misinformation that we are seeing in all aspects of our lives.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about this issue of transparency, though, because good polls will tell you who sponsored it, when they were in the field, what the margins of error are, what mode of interviewing they use to collect the data, et cetera, et cetera. There are standards, and then there are also mystery polls, which are very non-transparent. But here we go with this problem here. So we're very transparent because we believe in the professional standards and values of the industry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and what we teach the students at Marist College. And But what happens when you're transparent and you provide all this data about the nature of your sample, and people look through it, partisan folks, they find a statistic that doesn't look quite right to them, or they can hammer you with, even if it is right, like, why did you interview more Democrats than Republicans? Well, because there are more Democrats than Republicans. That's why. We don't go hunting for people. We take what comes out of the electorate. Having said that, you're opened up to, an enormous amount of criticism from the social media side of the world because you're being transparent. And that gets back to the relationship of polling to journalism, because the partisan journalists are there ready to hammer you also. It's a problem.
So let's note a couple of the other things that we're talking about, because I mentioned the Bump Peters debate, which is really over a not poll. It's like, poll that they do on American Idol or whatever. Internal polls. So these are politicians, commission polls, and they may be very good. They can be very expensive. They can be very rigorous.
Sure.
But politicians tend to release them or leak them to reporters, and I was the beneficiary of these, so I know this, when they either help themselves or hurt their competition. It's very rare. In fact, I never had it happen where a politician has a crappy poll, internal poll, say, hey, look, my numbers are really bad. That just doesn't happen. And it used to be you never reported on, I don't remember anybody when I was a journalist reporting on an internal poll, other than in some Washington newsletters where they identified them as internal polls. Mm-hmm. That is not the case anymore. Internal polls are mentioned extensively now in many of the Washington reporters, the various Washington-based, especially political outlets. And then another one is how...
Well, wait. Hang on a second, Jay. How about you answer this question? Because, so what's changed in journalism? Because these internal polls have existed, for decades now. And as you mentioned, they usually were kind of bandied about, among the, small group of people, and it was kind of gossipy. So you'd find it in a newsletter, or if you were chatting with some reporters, you'd hear about it. So what's happened in journalism that now these things are making it into stories?
So 20 years ago, we got an email newsletter right at the beginning of email, maybe 25 years ago, from, there was one called First Read from NBC. There was the Cook Report from the Hotline, or there was the Hotline. These were emails that were very insider. People in politics got them. It was an email. There was actually newsletters at one point before that. There was no Politico, there was no Axios, there was no, I can go down the list. We could spend the rest of this show talking about the number of online political sources there are now. And they are supported by a new kind of audience of people who are not addicted, but they love politics in the same way that people love sports.
We would probably qualify as
maybe. But they love it in the same way that people follow sports. Politics has become like another major sport, the NPA, the National Politics Association. And I think that's what's changed is you've got 1,000 reporters, 2,000 reporters in Washington chasing the same stories, and they're all chasing the same fairly limited set of eyeballs. Mm-hmm. And so they will take anything that they can, within reason, I guess, to make sure they get, clicks and hits.
I got a good example. And it has to do with outliers and how they're treated. So you have an outlier, you have a lot of polls and they're all saying the same thing. And there's the conventional wisdom about something occurring. And then someone shows up, usually, I shouldn't say always, but sometimes with a number that's really very, very different
out of the norm. That's what an outlier is.
I'm talking about recently the runoff election in California for Governor Newsom. Okay, so the polls were showing that he was going to win that out. That Newsom was going to lose. And
in other words, he was not going to be recalled.
He was not going to be recalled. He was going to win. And I believe it was Survey USA came out with one that said very different numbers.
They had him losing by double digits.
Okay.
Newsom was going to be recalled by double digits. It was a poll in the summer, in July.
Recognize that today's outlier may become tomorrow's conventional wisdom, but in this case, it wasn't. And yet, that really spun the story. It really hung in there, and I was not following it this closely, but I was expecting, yeah, maybe there's going to be a new
Although-
governor out there.
Well, there were a couple of things.
And then Newsom wins by 24 points.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, hang on just a second. Hang on just a second, guys. Okay.
I overstated. I overstated.
No. It is true. It drove all the attention. But if I recall, I mean, Newsom actually started putting this poll out and pointing to this poll as well to try to drum up voter interest, because there was the sense that, oh, well, he wouldn't be recalled by this conservative Republican in California. So there probably wasn't as much enthusiasm among his supporters. But, once this poll did come out, and Survey USA, is not a fly-by-night organization by any means. They actually have a good rating on 538, and they have been doing polling for a long time. And actually, they did come out, and just a couple of weeks before the election with another poll that did show significant double-digit.
And days after that poll that everybody quoted, they came out and said, "Wait, there's actually some design problems with this."
Yes.
But nobody heard that. Right?
No,
All
no.
the entire political press out in California and Washington was like, "Nope, not hearing that."
But it was to
Newsom's in
everyone's
trouble.
advantage.
It was
actually to the advantage of both campaigns,
Absolutely.
both Republican and Democrat,
Right.
to kind of whip this up and get some excitement going.
Right.
And then, ballots were sent out to every California voter shortly thereafter. It did cause quite a stir. I think polls become part, of the discussion. They become part of the debate, and they become part of the campaigns.
Yeah.
Just to the thing that you alluded to, Jay, with Survey USA today, which I did find was somewhat amusing, because I could really relate to how they stumbled into this. But the question they originally asked was whether to identify their likely voters, whether voters were, let me see if I can get this, certain to vote in the recall election to remove the governor. And
Maybe.
they were trying to be really literal, but I think people who didn't want to remove the governor then said, well, no, I'm not going to vote to remove the governor, but they were just trying to identify people who were certain to vote in the election.
Yeah.
They did change that, and they
That was
think
a triple negative.
We've got a couple of questions, so Ashley is going to make a reappearance here, and let's see what she's got. Hello again.
I'm back. So the first question is, has polling become just another institution and therefore merits distrust and skepticism like all institutions today?
Ooh,
Wow.
gosh.
There's an optimist.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Sorry, whoever asked the question. I'm just kidding. So do we?
Well,
Well,
I
yeah.
would say, yeah. I think that, when the former president, I should say, of the United States refers to polls as evil, I think that probably doesn't help with the entire electorate in terms of their confidence. I think we've seen, almost every group has had a drop in confidence. The highest ones are, I guess, public health professionals, but then Fauci became a target, and those numbers came down. They're still high. But if you look, Gallup does a question periodically, as do we, and it's institutions are getting whacked about, and it's a problem.
And there's a second question too, is that right?
Yes.
Let's take that one before we move on.
Yeah. The next question is for the layman reader or viewer. Are there any warning signs that a poll might be questionable?
Well, I would say top of the list is if the media source that is promoting or mentioning the poll doesn't actually include a link to the source itself that provides all the information and background to the poll. If you're reading something online, if there's no link in that story, just move on. The person's probably either just parsing out a piece of information that supports their story, or there's just something fishy about the poll. There should
Yeah.
always be a link to method.
Yeah, I would add also, if you're conducting a interview with a live interviewer, which is still the gold standard, ask if there's a phone number you can call back. And either you're going to be given a phone number by a legitimate organization, or you're going to get hung up on because there is none. I mean, then that's a good.
So we can
there.
also toot our own horn a little bit. We have an online learning platform called the Academy, Mayor's Poll Academy, and one of the courses in that is 12, actually it's been a while, 12, 15, I don't know. There's a number of steps. I think it's 15 maybe.
Do what
steps.
we always do, Jay. Just make up the number.
It'll be within the error margin.
It's within the margin of error. It's between 1 and 50 steps that you can take to what makes a good poll. The course is called What Makes a Good Poll, and Mary Griffith is the instructor in that. This is a free online platform. We've touted it a lot. You can link to it off our website. But that's it doesn't take long, and it's a great way to kind of bone up a little bit to get your chops together when you're looking at polls to see
I'll
what to
add
look
one
for.
more point on this because it's a really important question. One of the ways we talked about Real Clear Politics and how they sort of collect all these polls and put them in aggregate, and sort of the notion being if you add them all up and divide by the number, you're going to get an average, and that's a good number. The other thing is 538, which we think is a much more reliable source because they look at your track record for accuracy. They look at if there's a partisan leaning in your poll. They look at, I think, two other major factors in the what you've done or not done in your research, and then they come up with a grade so you can actually look up, believe it or not, the Marist poll on 538. And as Barbara would say, quoting Mario Cuomo, if you don't toot your own horn, there's no music. Yeah, Marist happens to have an A, which is why I think 538 is such a great organization.
That's not why. That's not why. But Real Clear, can be helpful. They do tend to take some polls and not others, and so it just tends to be a more haphazard aggregator.
Yeah, we look at Real Clear too, but
comes to
it's at the end of a poll, and we look at it to see whether we're going to be hammered for the results that we've just about to release on a poll. Because are we in step with everybody or not? The goal is, and this I think is important, what do we all aim for in the legitimate polling community and in the legitimate journalism community? Accuracy, insight. We're not spinning it. It's not what we're about, or what legitimate pollsters aren't about.
That's it on questions for this, or do you have any others? Okay, so let's move to segment 3, right? Is it like that? Am I doing it right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I don't know. Are you tossing it to me? Okay.
Tossing to you.
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Well, you're down here for me, but I don't know.
Okay, yeah.
The Brady Bunch here.
You're on my left side. How's that? So we've been talking about polling, and we're talking about journalism, and I think some of the points that we made sort of fall into this notion of how do you poll in such a hyper-partisan era? You hear about echo chambers, and that's been bandied about for, well, what do you watch? What do you listen to? What do you read? Well, you tend to read and listen to what you think you already. So you're not out to be getting informed. You're not being
You're trying to say confirmation bias?
Yeah, you want to be confirmed.
We're using big words here, Lee. Echo chamber, confirmation bias. I feel like I'm in your political communications course.
Okay, you want to be reinforced with what you already think by what you're watching, seeing, or hearing. Okay, so if I watch
comfort level with
I watch MSNBC, I want to be applauding. I don't want to be learning. If I watch Fox News, I want to be doing the same thing. If I turn on the other one, I want to boo or cheer, depending on where. It's all about where you stand, depends upon where you sit in this case. And polling is consumed the same way. And there's a lot of good examples of this. One I find particularly interesting, we've talked about some of this already, but Fox News does a poll. And the Fox News poll is legitimately done by real polling people.
It's a great
so
poll.
if it has,
they get an A-. I think it's an A- from 538.
Yeah, it's fine. They're fine. It's serious, and it's not when you put on, Sean Hannity or et cetera, et cetera.
It's the entertainment hour.
It's not the entertainment part. It's the part. But then when you see, it is somewhat entertaining to then watch how some of their media star commentators and anchors have to deal with a poll that is very much, counter to the stated thing. be it on COVID or Joe Biden or whatever. It's just a messy thing.
I think one of the things that also, has happened is, polls used to have, I think, a little bit more legitimacy in the sense that we were numbers. So we could quantify things, and numbers looked, accurate and, like they were real. And I think it's interesting because there's a couple of political scientists at Duke University who basically have found that people are more likely to trust a poll if it backs their opinion and question a poll that doesn't fit their opinion or their worldview. And so we've kind of, moved pretty far away in terms of, and maybe it gets back to this concept of, trust in institutions. We're now questioning everything. We feel that we can do our own research, but the sources that we're using may not be, the sources that are will be most helpful to us.
I think, part of it's easy to point the finger and say, oh, well, Donald Trump caused this by fake polls. But this has been this research, as you mentioned from the folks at Duke, is not about partisanship. It's about, or names like, I don't trust Fox poll because it's Fox News. It's more, you hear the poll and that makes sense to me, that result. It's not about the name of the poll as much as it's about the result. So we see that, when Trump does blast polls, being fake polls, because they're not confirming what he says. And we're seeing it from others when they, there are others again, I don't want to play too much both sides here, but there are plenty of Democrats who have criticized polls as well because it doesn't support what they're thinking they're going to get. But the fact is that polling is at least as accurate now as it's ever been, and COVID
Proves
helped
it.
show this. How did that happen? We talked about this on a prior episode, but how did that happen?
Well, one of the things about public polling is you have very limited accountability, but you do have accountability that doesn't exist elsewhere. So when you do a poll and there's an election, you find out generally how good you were in calling the winners and losers. In the case of the COVID research, there's been some numbers that have shown how many people in the polls have gotten vaccinated. And there's also numbers that the government has been providing about how many people have been vaccinated. And it's been kind of nice from a polling perspective that the poll numbers have been right on with the governmental figures on vaccinations, suggesting major accountability and accuracy to the technique and the method that has been brought under question because of 2016 and because of 2020, where a variety of things went on that deserved fuller explanation than they got on election night when the votes hadn't even been all counted.
Yeah, and I think that, I think it also plays into the fact of, what we were really discussing with journalism too, because we've had this whole proliferation of polls. How do you figure out what is the real number and what is a number that has been used to make a point, or to make an argument, or to back someone else's opinion? But as you point out, Jay, polling has been very accurate and continues to be so, despite the fact that there is all of this noise.
What have we done? What have we had to do to address polling in the hyperpartisan era? Whether it's better training for our students that make the phone calls because of the pushback they may be getting. I mean, what has changed from the inside baseball standpoint because of this hyperpartisanship?
Well, it goes back to what you said at the beginning. Because of the changing educational levels of the party affiliation, after the 2016 election, everybody said, well, we didn't get enough Trump people, we better weight by education. So they did that, and in 2020, the magic bullet turned out not to work.
We didn't do that.
We didn't.
A lot of polls did. We didn't, and not all polls did.
But we have kind of taken a different path, which talks more about the geography of where you find voters. You asked for inside baseball. I'll turn it over to Coach Carvalho for this to
Ah.
explain what difference does it make.
She's the general
No,
manager here, Lee.
No, what it is that, this is one, Lee knows this is one of my soapbox issues because, science, as we've seen with COVID, science is hard. And especially when you're trying to measure something in real time or, with COVID, you're trying to address a very significant global issue in real time. So you're going to see the messy part of science. And I think what we've seen in the last decade or so is the messy part of polling because things have changed. We have much more difficult time getting a hold of people, not because they're not talking to us as much as they're not picking up a telephone. I mean, if you have your cell phone, you're going to assume that, if you don't recognize the number, that it's spam. So we need to figure out ways where we can connect with people in real time. The other difficulty, too, is that as a country, we've become not just this hyperpolarization that we've been talking about, but we've also segregated ourselves geographically in terms of, the places we want to be, the types of lifestyle that we want to have.
The fast food restaurants we want to go to.
Or not.
Right, or not, yeah.
And, for instance, had some, acquaintances in Austin, Texas, and they were saying, gosh, I think it's time for us to move to a blue state. And I was like, well, why? I mean, you actually have liked Austin. And they were like, well, because, we're vaccinated. A lot of other people aren't. But this has been going on for quite some time. In other words, people moving to places where they feel a better connection politically, ideologically.
Does that make it harder for us to poll or
makes
easier?
It a lot harder for us to poll
Yeah.
because now we're going into, for instance, urban areas and suburban areas, which if you think about the fact that we have to call a lot of people on cell phones. Well, those are the places that we're most likely to get people on cell phones. And the reason? Reception. It's a lot easier to talk to people on a cell phone in an urban area or a suburban area. And once you get beyond, that ex-urban area into the rural parts of the country.
I've got one bar of 4G.
Yeah.
One bar, 4G.
Yeah.
I'm not answering my phone.
Yeah, exactly. And so
I live in the sticks, by the way, in case anybody was
technology
confused.
itself. I mean, when we were making calls with landlines, everybody had a landline. You could connect with everybody. It was on copper. Of all things. And so the call actually went through. And I can remember us thinking about, well, can we move to voice over IP? Because people aren't going to hear you clearly and you might blank out. Well, hello world. That's what we're used to now. I mean, if we're able to have a conversation or a phone call or even a Zoom call where everybody's connected and not out of sync, we feel that's something unusual. So although we've gotten used to this kind of not so great service, the technology itself makes a difference as to who we can actually connect with.
So we have to be very careful to get those rural voters because they're different politically than the other folks, and we have to make sure we got the right number, and they have to be rural folks. They can't be living in a little city in a rural area because that's very different. Poughkeepsie
Because a Republican
and the eastern part of Dutchess County are very different politically, and you just can't call Dutchess County because you might get, quote, the wrong folks.
And so that affects, just to make it clear to people who aren't statisticians like me, that's because, I mean, if you're calling 1,000 people in Dutchess County, that's not hard to do. But if you're calling in the state of New York, you might only get one person or two people in Dutchess County, and you can't check that off and say, oh, we got all of Dutchess County because we got that one person in Dutchess County, because you actually are talking to relatively few people in discrete counties. Is that fair?
You're building a whole group out of that, and you want to make sure we know what the ingredients are. We don't necessarily know what the recipe is. And we have to know of how much of each one we got.
And so if we're speaking to a white Republican with a college education in a rural area, and a white Republican with a college education in the suburban area, they don't necessarily have the same opinion.
Right. Do you think they have the same opinion about Halloween candy, though?
Well, here we go now. We're going to switch over to the fun fact and do a non-scientific poll in a second. But Barb, before we do that, you mentioned copper in the last segment. And for a minute, I thought you were going to refer to the line in your favorite movie, Moonstruck, or one of your favorite movies about the plumber's discussion of what
yes,
works.
copper.
Copper's the way to go.
He only uses copper, not plastic, not bronze.
I had no idea she quoted movies. This is new. We're on episode 220. I did not know this.
She also does a good Donald Trump imitation, but that's
no,
that's not going to happen tonight.
I like my cousin Vinny. Cousin Vinny. I prefer my cousin Vinny. Yeah.
Jay, what do you got? What are we talking about here? We're talking about Halloween.
It's your fun fact. It's not
I know
mine.
it's my fun fact, but why don't you set up what they have to do? We have an audience.
Well, I will. So once we get into this, I'm going to pop a poll up on the screen, and everybody, including us, panelists, we get to vote too. You get to vote, and then you'll see it on screen what the results are. That's it.
This
just
is
a
not
little
going to be rigged.
straw poll, as they say.
Straw
Although,
poll. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so we're mirroring the results that Monmouth Poll did in September of 2019. They interviewed a national group, and the question was, what is your favorite choice for candy for Halloween?
so do we want to tell them what the results are, or do we want to do the poll first? Let's do the poll first, right?
I think you do the poll, but I will say one thing right off the bat. I'm very upset they did not have a category in their poll for all of the above. They had none of the above, but not all of the above. So I really got to take issues with my friends at Monmouth on that. So now I see, and everybody who's watching, you do see what is your favorite candy for Halloween. It's now more safer to go out trick-or-treating this year than it's been.
So while you're doing that and pausing and teasing, whether we're going to find out who's everybody's favorite candy.
Well, you two get to vote. Don't forget.
I did find another survey, which was not a terribly scientific poll, but was done online and for fun. And what's interesting is, we talked about this, how journalists I found this poll everywhere. It was practically on every conceivable news station you could think of, every newspaper, and it was whether people were going to allow their children to participate in Halloween this year. And they asked parents. It was an online survey done by a company that does a lot of brand work. And 2/3 of parents said that they were going to allow their children to participate this year in Halloween, much higher than it was obviously last year in 2020 in the midst of COVID. But one of the things I thought that was really interesting was when they asked them, well, what does it mean to participate in Halloween? There was a whole slew of answers, from just getting together with a small group of friends to in classroom activities, only with family, going to someone else's home, and even Zoom chats qualified as participating.
Happy Halloween. We're doing it right here.
Yeah, there you go.
Exactly.
There you go. And, and thankfully, there'll be a lot of leftovers, I hope, because we'll overstock. And then I can eat the stuff
So
I
come
like.
on.
Okay, so I'm ending the poll here, and I'm going to share the results.
Okay.
Failed to share poll. Another poll has started. I didn't share another poll.
Well, but see how easy it is to vote online for things. You see
Download, view results for resume.
Unless you want the results.
I don't seem to be able to share this. I don't know why it's telling me I can't share it. So why don't you, Lee?
Us?
Well, Lee, you tell us the results, and then we'll. Oh no, you want to do the results of this poll first, and then.
Oh yeah.
So in our poll, 36%.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding. Said Reese's peanut butter cups.
Oh, that's too.
Oh, come on.
The reason we're reacting is the national poll showed, drum roll, 36% favored Reese's.
The rest doesn't work. So 27% were M&Ms, and then there was like a four-way tie with candy corn, Skittles, Snickers, and Starburst. Nobody picked Tootsie Pops. Nobody picked Hershey bars. And nobody picked other, which I kind of I like.
Wait a minute! Whoa! Snickers.
Snickers
say
was tied.
Snickers?
It was a four-way tie. Starburst, Snickers, Skittles, and candy corn.
Oh, come on. Candy corn? I
Oh,
mean,
I don't
really.
know.
Hold on a second.
Snickers does not compete with candy
But
corn.
let's don't talk about the four-way tie because that's not the winner. Okay, so what we got here is 36% for Reese's and 27%
Now, this was the
for
national
M&Ms.
poll.
This is the actual poll. Yeah.
No.
No, this is our poll. This is our
Oh,
poll.
okay. I'm sorry.
36 and 27. The national poll was 36 for Reese's, 18 for Snickers, 11 for M&M's. So a little bit a flip-flop there. But we have 63% saying either M&M's or Reese's peanut butter cup.
Yeah. So what did
That's
you say,
the
Lee?
story.
Besides all of the above.
I'm the winner. I had the winner. I was
What?
winner.
Oh, yeah. And
Reese's,
Barb?
I'm a Snickers person.
Okay, Ashley, jump in here because I want to. You need to come back. I like Starburst. I always loved Starburst. In fact, I would eat
I
so many
do
they'd make
enjoy
me
it.
sick. You know, what's yours, Ashley?
I picked M&Ms. They're a classic.
Peanut?
or
Almond?
regular?
Well, see,
Regular.
Well, if we're gonna pick one,
So that didn't end quite as we thought. We got caught up in a little technology problem, and so the show ended on a sweet note. How's that? Sweet note with candy?
No,
Anyway.
we're all out of candy, Jay. That's what it is. The doorbell rung and there was no more candy.
So the Marist Poll is a production of the Marist Poll. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York.
and our executive producer is Mary Griffith. But our show producer tonight and for the last couple of months is Ashley Morsenek. Our editor is Marcello Bettman, soaking up the sun. Athen Hollis is on our production team, and Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
And many thanks, as we always give credit to the Roper Center, as well as the Offices of Admissions and College Advancement here at Marist for providing assistance to this program. And of course, to all of you for joining us tonight.
Even if we did get cut off in mid-sentence and you probably wondered what happened to us. If you're interested in checking out any of the sources that we mentioned in this podcast, they are going to be down in the show notes. And that includes a link to the Academy, which we like to tout. But all the other things we talked about, we'll put all those links in the show notes. And the episode should be publishing. You'll be listening to this, presumably, as we publish right there in your podcasting app of choice.
And thanks for joining us tonight. We'll be back with a regular episode of Poll Hub next week.